So put yourself in the shoes of a 9-year-old boy. This is in 1920s Sweden. And you are locked inside a pitch-black closet.
Right, and we should be clear, this is not like a game of hide and seek. It is a punishment.
Exactly. It's a punishment. You live in this suffocatingly strict, deeply conservative household. And if you commit an infraction as minor as wetting the bed, you get thrown into the dark.
Which is just a terrifying environment for a kid.
Absolutely terrifying. But the thing is, you find a way out. Not by picking the lock or anything, but through this really calculated trade. You take a prize set of toy tin soldiers, and you swap them with your brother for a magic lantern.
Yeah, which is an incredibly profound exchange when you really look at the psychology of it.
Right.
I mean, you're trading the rigid, organized ranks of a little toy army for a projector, a device that literally casts light into the darkness.
That's such a great way to put it. And in the glow of that little toy, he begins constructing a completely private, meticulously controlled universe.
He's making his own scenery, manipulating these colored shadows and marionettes, basically just blocking out the harsh, unpredictable reality that's waiting on the other side of that closet door.
And that boy grew up to be Ernst Ingmar Bergman, widely considered to be one of the greatest, most profound filmmakers in the history of cinema.
Unquestionably.
So welcome to this deep dive for a People Pod. Today, we are looking past that intimidating, highly intellectual reputation. You know, the guy they call the poet with the camera.
Yeah, we're going to examine the deeply human, remarkably messy story behind that camera. Because if you trace the arc of Bergman's life, it is entirely defined by this relentless tug-of-war between control and chaos.
It really is. We're going to explore how he built this sealed-off cinematic empire to manage his own existential dread.
And, well, how a devastating collision with the uncontrollable machinery of the Swedish government nearly destroyed him.
So to understand the mechanics of how Bergman built his worlds, we really have to look at the environment that forced him to build them in the first place.
Right. You have to start at the beginning.
Yeah. And this starts in Uppsala, Sweden. He is born to a mother of noble Walloon descent, and his father is a conservative Lutheran parish minister.
A very prominent one, actually. A man who eventually rises to become chaplain to the King of Sweden.
Wow. So, yeah, the discipline in that house was brutal, but there is this secondary environment that's constantly competing for young Ingmar's attention, and that is the church itself.
Exactly. The physical space of the church offered this stark contrast to the sterile discipline of his home.
How so?
Well, in his autobiography, it's called The Magic Lantern, Bergman talks about sitting in the pews while his father preached. And he just tuned out the sermons completely.
I mean, what kid wouldn't?
Right. Instead, he let his mind wander through the architecture. He absorbed the low arches, the thick stone walls, the way the sunlight filtered through stained glass, illuminating all these medieval paintings.
He noted that the walls were covered with, like, everything an imagination could ever crave. Angels, saints, dragons, prophets, devils.
So he's just being saturated with these massive, mystical visual symbols.
Right. So while his father is verbally laying down the rigid laws of the household, the building itself is showing the boy how to speak in vivid emotional imagery.
And the outcome of those competing forces is really striking. I mean, despite, or maybe because of, that intense religious indoctrination, he secretly lost his faith by the age of 8.
8 years old. That's so young to have that kind of existential shift.
It is. He essentially lived a double life. Outwardly, he played the part of the obedient minister's son, but inwardly, he was already discarding the concept of God and retreating into that puppet theater he controlled in his bedroom.
And this internal rebellion, it starts bleeding into his real life as he gets older. By the time he's a teenager attending the Palmgren school, he's just miserable.
Yeah, he explicitly refers to himself as a problem child.
He despised the entire institution of formal education, the testing, the constant evaluation. And this sets the stage for a deeply unsettling turning point in his life.
Very unsettling.
It's 1934. He is 16, and he is sent away to Germany to spend the summer with family friends. And while he's there, he attends a Nazi rally in Weimar and physically sees Adolf Hitler.
And we have to note, the family he stayed with actively encouraged this. They even hung a portrait of Hitler on the wall by his bed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Bergman admitted later in life that for years, he considered himself on Hitler's side.
Which is chilling to hear. But as you look at his background, to a 16-year-old who is suffocating under the thumb of a strict Swedish school and a rigid father, you can sort of see how he fell for it.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the pageantry he witnessed felt in his own words, fun and youthful. Hitler's charisma electrified the crowd, and Bergman just got completely swept up in that collective energy.
When you think about it, he was basically swapping one authoritarian figure for another. But this new one offered an illusion of rebellion.
Right. Until the war ends and the terrifying reality of the concentration camps is broadcast to the world.
And he later describes seeing those images as this hideous shock. He said he was violently ripped of his innocence.
The chaos of that realization fundamentally rewired his worldview. He recognized that his own mind had been completely hijacked by mass manipulation.
The propaganda had bypassed his intellect and just preyed on his teenage frustrations.
Precisely.
So let me ask you this. Did this horrifying realization of his own youthful gullibility directly lead to his adult stance? The fact that he refused to make political propaganda and focused purely on the human soul.
Oh, absolutely. He saw the destructive endpoint of trying to control the masses. So instead, he turned his lens inward. He focused on the one thing he felt he could legitimately dissect and understand, which was the individual human soul.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, he stated very plainly as an adult that as an artist, he was not politically involved. Even though he leaned towards social democracy and his personal voting habits, he outright refused to make art that championed any political attitude.
His focus just narrowed exclusively to existential questions and the inner life. And he pursues that inner life with a vengeance. He drops out of Stockholm University, abandons formal education completely, and throws himself into writing and student theater.
Which leads to his first big breakthrough.
Right, in 1944. He writes the screenplay for a film called Torment, sometimes translated as Frenzy. This is his first major splash, and it functions as a direct, vicious attack on the Swedish school system.
It was weaponized catharsis. The script was such a visceral critique of authoritarian schooling that it triggered a national debate in Sweden regarding formal education.
Didn't the principal of his old high school actually get involved?
Yes. The principal wrote a public letter defending the system, and Bergman fired back in the press, explicitly stating that his script was an indictment of all schools as institutions of control.
Film basically became his tool for challenging the authorities that had dictated his youth.
And once he figured out how to use that tool, his output became staggering. I mean, by the mid-1950s, he transitions from being just a provocateur to an internationally acclaimed master.
Yeah, he directs Smiles of a Summer Night in 1955, which proves he can actually handle comedy. And then in 1957, he unleashes two absolute cinematic monoliths just 10 months apart.
10 months. It's incredible.
A Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries.
And the mechanics of how he produced those films are just as important as the films themselves. He intentionally bypassed the traditional Hollywood studio system.
Which is usually a nightmare of interference, right?
Oh, standard film production is inherently chaotic. You have massive crews, interfering executives, test audiences, bloated budgets. Bergman rejected all of that.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we evolve that metaphor from the beginning of our discussion, it's almost as if the Swedish island of Faro, where he eventually built his own studio, became the grown-up version of that dark closet.
That's a brilliant way to look at it.
Only this time, he holds the key on the inside. He locks the chaos of the studio system out so he can project his own visions in total safety.
And he achieved that safety through extreme financial discipline. By keeping his budgets microscopic, he eliminated the need for outside financiers.
Can you give an example of how small we're talking?
Well, take his 1972 masterpiece, Cries and Whispers. It was nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, yet it was shot for roughly $450,000.
Wait, really? How does a filmmaker even accomplish that on a technical level? How do you make a Best Picture contender for the price of a modest house?
You strip away the artifice, you don't build massive, sprawling sets, you rely on the human face as your primary landscape. Bergman utilized intense, lingering close-ups.
Ah, right, his signature style.
Exactly. He also formed what was essentially a repertory company, a dedicated recurring troupe of actors, Max von Sydow, B.B. Anderson, Harriet Anderson, and Liv Ullmann.
So by using the same performers repeatedly, he bypassed the chaotic, time-consuming process of casting and building chemistry from scratch.
They became a surrogate family, and the shorthand he developed with his crew was legendary, especially with his primary cinematographer, Sven Nykvist.
Right, they were a famous duo.
They worked so intuitively that they frequently wouldn't even discuss the lighting or composition of a scene until the morning of the shoot. Bergman would just describe the emotional temperature he wanted, and then leave Nykvist to execute it without hovering over his shoulder.
Wow. And because he established this airtight, highly controlled ecosystem, he possessed the freedom to tackle massive, deeply uncomfortable cerebral topics.
Without a studio executive telling him to make it more commercial?
Exactly. Like in the early 1960s, he directed an unofficial trilogy consisting of Through a Glass Darkly, Winter Light, and The Silence.
And those films stare directly into the abyss.
They really do. They deal with agonizing loneliness, terminal illness, and this terrifying concept of the silence of God.
The idea that we are screaming into a void that simply does not care.
But if you were listening to this and assuming Bergman's films are just like people sitting in drafty gray rooms debating theology, you are missing a crucial layer.
A very crucial layer.
He always anchored those lofty metaphysical concepts in raw, visceral human flesh.
Because he had an acute understanding that you cannot film an abstract concept like the silence of God. You can only film the human reaction to that silence.
All right.
And that reaction is often physical. He explicitly stated he did not want to make purely intellectual films. He wanted audiences to sense them physically.
Whether he's depicting a medieval plague in The Seventh Seal or modern alienation in The Silence, human sexuality and physical desire are always at the forefront.
And his female characters were particularly groundbreaking in this regard. In an era where cinema often relegated women to really narrow archetypes, his female leads were fiercely complex.
They were overtly sexual, highly attuned to their own desires, and entirely unapologetic about voicing them. It brought a profound emotional intelligence to the screen.
The director Bertrand Tavernier once compared Bergman to a miner digging for purity. He specifically praised how Bergman articulated the complex dynamics between men and women. The empathy he displayed for his character's psychological suffering was unparalleled.
See, I have to challenge that empathy, though, because there's a glaring contradiction here.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you look at his biography, how do we reconcile the brilliant artist who scripts such deep, empathetic, emotional intelligence with the man who left an absolute trail of wreckage in his real-life relationships?
It's messy.
It's beyond messy. He was married 5 times. He fathered 9 children. He constantly engaged in affairs with his leading actresses, including Liv Ullmann, with whom he had a daughter. It feels deeply hypocritical.
It is the ultimate paradox of his life. The man who could chart the intricate depths of human connection on a script page struggled profoundly to sustain it when the camera stopped rolling.
Did he ever address it?
He notoriously justified his infidelities to his wives by telling them, "I have so many lives."
Which, I mean, sounds like an incredibly convenient excuse for bad behavior.
Oh, it was a defense mechanism.
Oh.
He was essentially compartmentalizing the chaos of his reality. Film was, as he called it, his demanding mistress.
So by claiming he had so many lives, he was attempting to manage the unpredictable nature of real human relationships by treating them like different film productions.
Exactly. The devastation he caused in his personal life was the collateral damage of maintaining absolute singular focus on his art. He needed to be the undisputed master of his universe.
Which is why he retreated to the remote island of Faro to control his environment completely.
Right. He builds his fortress. He isolates himself. He is the master of his domain.
Until January 30th, 1976. This is the moment the real, uncontrollable world violently kicks the doors down.
This is the central crisis of his adult life.
Bergman was at the Royal Dramatic Theatre in Stockholm, rehearsing a play by August Strindberg called The Dance of Death.
So he is at the absolute height of his cultural power, working in his most comfortable element.
Right. And suddenly, 2 plainclothes police officers interrupt the rehearsal and arrest him for tax evasion.
It wasn't just an arrest either. It was a public spectacle. The investigation centered around a 1970 transaction between his Swedish production company and a Swiss subsidiary called Persona.
And for she had used to pay foreign actors, right?
Yes. And the devastating irony is that the charges were entirely baseless. Bergman had already dissolved the Swiss company years prior and reported the income after being notified by the Swedish central bank.
Unbelievable.
The special prosecutor who eventually dropped the charges completely exonerated him. He stated that bringing charges against Bergman was akin to bringing charges against a person who had stolen his own car.
But the bureaucratic machinery had already run him over. The public humiliation of being marched out of a theater by police shattered him. He suffered a severe nervous breakdown, plunging into a deep depression that required hospitalization.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the psychological through line here is tragic.
How do you mean?
Well, this is a man who spent decades meticulously analyzing guilt, shame, and the fragile nature of the human psyche on film. And then he is completely broken by a public, entirely unwarranted shaming by the state apparatus.
Right. The state represented the ultimate form of arbitrary authority, the very thing he had rebelled against since he was a teenager, trapped in a rigid school system.
The realization that he could not control this narrative, that the government could simply intrude and humiliate him on a global stage, was just too much to bear.
So his reaction is a complete withdrawal. Despite personal pleas from the Swedish Prime Minister and the heads of the film industry begging him to stay, he shuts down his operations.
He closes the studio on Faro Island, suspends multiple film projects, which reportedly cost the Swedish film industry millions of kronor and hundreds of jarbs, and he flees.
He goes into self-imposed exile in Munich, West Germany.
He felt a profound sense of betrayal. Even though he continued to work and direct during his time in Germany, he later admitted that the exile cost him 8 years of his professional life.
The psychological wound of losing control over his own dignity was incredibly deep.
It takes years, but he eventually manages to navigate his way back. By the early 1980s, the bitterness subsides enough for him to return to Sweden.
And his homecoming is nothing short of triumphant. He writes and directs Fanny and Alexander in 1982, an expansive semi-autobiographical epic that goes on to win 4 Academy Awards.
And then he publicly declared it would be his final film.
Which is a common refrain for artists of his caliber, though rarely true.
Very true. While he did step back from massive theatrical film productions, he never truly relinquished the director's chair. He poured his energy into theater and television, continuing to explore the human condition.
Remarkably, he directed Saraband, a follow-up to his iconic Scenes from a Marriage, when he was 84 years old.
84.
I know. He lived out his final years back in his sanctuary on Faro Island, eventually passing away peacefully in his sleep in 2007 at the age of 89.
And in one of those bizarre, almost scripted historical coincidences, he died on the exact same day as the legendary Italian director Michelangelo Antonioni.
2 towering figures of existential cinema exiting the world simultaneously.
Yeah, it's wild. But his death is not where the story ends.
No, it's not, because after he passed, a massive archive of his personal notes, journals, and scripts was donated to the Swedish Film Institute.
And when archivists finally opened those boxes, they did not just find a stack of polished, pristine masterpieces.
No, they found the chaos he had hidden from the world. They uncovered a closet full of bizarre, unfinished ideas and terrible drafts.
The contents were fascinating. They found loose scenes meant to take place entirely inside a womb. They discovered an outline for a play about a cannibal.
There was a script for a pornographic film that he ultimately abandoned because he noted it simply wasn't, quote, alive enough?
There was a play draft titled From Sperm to Spook.
And perhaps most revealing, an envelope for a never-performed play called Love Without Lovers, across which he had aggressively scrawled the words, complete disaster.
Think about what that means. Here's a man revered as an unassailable genius. Stanley Kubrick wrote him a letter stating that Bergman's vision of life moved him more deeply than any other filmmaker.
Woody Allen idolized him as the greatest film artist since the invention of the camera.
Yet even Ingmar Bergman wrote terrible first drafts. He had to wade through the chaos of bad ideas to engineer the control of his masterpieces.
It strips away the intimidating mythology and leaves us with the reality of the working artist.
The director Todd Field summarized his legacy perfectly. He referred to Bergman as our tunnel man.
I love that quote.
Yeah, he built the aqueducts of our cinematic collective unconscious, bringing water to an audience who didn't even realize they were thirsty.
He was the first to drag raw metaphysics, existential dread, and the terrifying silence of the universe out of the shadows and project it directly onto the screen,
refusing to filter it through the comforting, predictable tropes of Hollywood.
So as you go about your day, consider this final paradox about the man behind the camera. Throughout his entire adult life, Ingmar Bergman suffered from crippling psychosomatic stomach problems and severe insomnia.
His physical discomfort was so constant that he once joked his greatest lasting contribution to the history of the theater was forcing management to build private lavatories for him in the buildings where he worked.
He lived in a state of nearly constant physical and emotional agitation.
He was a man consumed by the very anxieties he was trying to film.
Exactly. And yet from that agonizing, chaotic internal pain, he managed to synthesize a body of art that has provided profound spiritual comfort, recognition, and a sense of shared humanity to millions of strangers sitting in the dark.
He never really stopped being that 9-year-old boy.
He just took his magic lantern, stepped out of the dark closet, and showed the rest of the world his ghosts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.